Dr. Fishbein. Thank you for letting me interview you.
It's a pleasure. Well, we perform about 300 to 350 solid organ transplants per year at Georgetown University Hospital. That makes us one of the 10 or 15 largest solid organ transplant programs in the United States. So currently we do around 180 to 200 kidney transplants a year, 100 to 115 liver transplants a year, and then we do 20 or 25 what we call intestine or multi-organ transplants. The numbers of transplants we've done here at Georgetown have increased significantly over the last decade as we've built the program from a small local program to really a national referral center. And that reflects some of the special skills that we've brought in over that period of time. Well, transplantation is a fairly young field of medicine. So the first kidney transplants done in the world that were successful were only in the 1960s, really. So we've come a long way over only about 60 years, 50 years. And the survival rates have gone up very significantly. So for instance, if we do a pediatric liver transplant right now at Georgetown, we have a 96 or 98% chance that that baby is going to be successfully alive with a functioning graft a year out, and even 10 years after the transplant, it's something like 85 to 90%. So we have very good survival rates, and they have gone up very significantly over time. Now, the increases have gone up for a variety of reasons. We have developed and refined the surgical techniques for doing transplants very greatly over the last 50 years. But there are many other aspects of transplantation that have also improved the results. One of the major ones is the study of the immune system and the immune reaction against a transplanted graft. So as we have studied the immunology of how the body responds to something, it's allowed us to target certain immune responses with the development of new medications to control them. So what we called immune suppressive medications, those that suppress the response of rejection of the organ, we have developed a whole host of new medications just over the last 20 years that have made dramatic improvements over time in organ transplant. And then there are many other aspects of the medical management of the patients, prevention of infections that used to happen more frequently after the transplant, selection of the candidates for the transplant, who we decide to do it on and who we decide is too high risk, things like that. All of these things. And then finally, choosing intelligently the right donor organ to place into the right recipient, the right matching of organ and patient together for a successful outcome. All of these things over time have really made remarkable improvements in the outcomes. Transplantation is sort of a specialty practice that happens only in very small numbers of hospitals and highly select settings. So there are what we call community hospital transplant programs, and so those programs just do the clinical practice of performing transplants. But still today, there are about 120 university hospitals around the United States, most all of which have a transplant program. And the majority of these transplant programs are very academic and have at least clinical, if not basic immunology research associated with it. There are big differences in the wait time for some organs over others. So for instance, here in Washington, if you go on the kidney transplant list and you don't have a family member or friend who will donate one of their kidneys to you, the average waiting time to get a kidney transplant off the list is 5 years. You will wait on dialysis for 5 years on average. There are other parts of the country where the waiting time is a year or less for a kidney transplant. So there are big geographic disparities from one part of the country to another with regards to how many organs are available and how many people need the transplant. Then there are also disparities from one organ to the next. And some of this relates to the way that organs are allocated to patients that are waiting on the list. For the kidney, it's purely about waiting time. You get your name on the list, you wait until you progress from the bottom of the list until you have the most waiting time, and then you get to the top of the list. And that generally is what drives the allocation of the organs. For liver transplant, for heart transplant, and for lung transplant, those are actually very different. And they're based on what we call the severity of illness. And there's a score to calculate how severely ill each patient is. The field is evolving at a fairly quick pace. And I think that there are several areas where we're going to make significant advances over the next decade or two. We work in this field of what we call regenerative medicine, where we are trying to grow organs. I think rather than actually growing a solid organ in the shape of a kidney like you would see today or the shape of a liver, I think we're probably more likely in the short run to make advances in what we would call cellular therapies or cell transplants. So if your liver is failing one particular job, we may be able to replace hepatocytes or liver cells that can provide the function that your liver's not providing and improve the function of your liver, so maybe it's good enough that you don't need a transplant. Another area that will probably contribute to big breakthroughs in the next 10 to 20 years are in the area of what we call tolerance. So if I put an organ into your body now and we don't give you medications to suppress your immune system, your body will not be tolerant of that organ, and it will not tolerate it in your body. It will reject it and kill off the organ, and that will make you quite sick. And so the only way to get a successful transplant now is to suppress your immune system. Well, tricking your immune system so that it actually becomes tolerant to another person's organ and thinks that that organ is yours and you accept it now rather than having to just suppress your immune system, this is an area that we're working heavily in. And we're making advances where we now have 10 or 20 patients around the United States that we've tricked the immune system of and have been able to do the transplant, and there are no medications. And so generalizing that to all people who get a solid organ transplant is going to be a huge difference for the future. There are incredibly important aspects to both the science and medicine behind transplantation, and also the power of harnessing public policy to make a radical change that's better for people. Now, only about a third of the people who can donate do donate. Moving to a public policy that considers donation of your organs when you leave this life to be a community requirement or a duty to the community, that would be very huge. And there are systems that function a little bit differently than ours in other countries that have demonstrated for us that we can significantly increase the amount of organs to go around. So we have what's called an opt-in system. It's assumed when anybody dies that they are not going to donate their organs, and then we go and ask them at this terrible time when someone in the family has died, would you like to give their organs for transplant? And the family has to opt into the system and decide to give their organs, right? On the other hand, there are several countries in Northern Europe, in Belgium, France, and Spain, where they have an opt-out system. So it's assumed that if someone dies, they automatically are an organ donor unless their family expressly says we have a religious or ethical reason that we do not believe in and do not want to donate organs. Otherwise, they are part of the organ donor pool. And so assuming that everybody is giving something back to the community has increased the yield in some of those countries by about twofold over what we have here. I put my money right now with the bigger breakthroughs coming from the scientists and the doctors than public policy, but the the ability to make a big breakthrough on the public policy side is very, very big if we could get it to work.